Jackson Davis had lived peacefully on his 15-acre ranch for over 20 years. He loved waking up to the sound of birds chirping rather than car horns honking. His ranch sat on the edge of town, with rolling hills that stretched as far as the eye could see. The morning sun would cast long shadows across the fields where his horses grazed without a care in the world. Jackson wasn't rich by any means, but he was happy. His grandfather had passed down this land to his father, who then passed it down to him. The ranch house wasn't fancy, just a simple 2-story home with a wide porch where Jackson would sit in his rocking chair at sunset, watching the sky turn pink and orange while sipping his evening coffee. Life had been good and quiet until about 3 years ago. That's when the bulldozers arrived next door. A big company bought the land beside his ranch and started building Whispering Pines, a fancy neighborhood with huge houses that cost more than Jackson would make in 10 lifetimes. Progress, the mayor had called it when Jackson went to the town meeting to voice his concerns. It'll bring jobs and money to our town. Jackson wasn't against progress, but he worried about how it would change things. During the construction, his horses got spooked by the constant noise. The dust from the building site covered everything on his property. At night, the bright security lights made it hard to see the stars that had guided his family for generations. Still, Jackson tried to be a good neighbor. When the first families moved in, he brought over homemade apple pies and introduced himself. Most people were nice enough, if a bit stuck up about their big houses and fancy cars. Then Patricia Wellington moved in. Patricia became the head of the Homeowners Association faster than Jackson could blink. She was tall with blonde hair always pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her clothes probably cost more than Jackson's truck, and she made sure everyone knew it. The first time Jackson saw her driving across his property, he thought she was lost. His private dirt road ran along the back of his land, connecting the north and south pastures. It wasn't much, just packed dirt with grass growing down the middle, but it was definitely on his property. Jackson waved her down politely. "Excuse me, ma'am. I think you might have taken a wrong turn. This here's private property." Patricia looked at him through the window of her shiny white Range Rover like he was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "This road saves me 5 minutes on my commute. I'm sure you don't mind." Before Jackson could respond, she drove off, leaving a cloud of dust. The next day, Jackson put up a no trespassing sign at the entrance to his dirt road. By evening, the sign was lying flat on the ground, tire tracks showing where someone had deliberately run it over. So he tried again. This time he installed a stronger sign and added a chain across the road with a padlock. It wasn't meant to keep people out permanently. He still needed to get his own truck through, but it was a clear message. That afternoon, his security camera caught Patricia getting out of her Range Rover, removing the chain, driving through, and then leaving the chain on the ground behind her. "This is getting ridiculous," Jackson muttered to himself as he watched the footage on his old laptop. The next morning, he decided to talk to her directly. He waited by the road until her car appeared. "Mrs. Wellington," he said, standing his ground as her car approached, "I need to ask you to stop driving across my land. You're making deep ruts in the road that are hard for me to fix, and you're scaring my horses." Patricia barely rolled down her window. "This road has been here longer than you've owned this property. It's an established route with historical access rights." Jackson frowned. "Ma'am, my family has owned this land for 3 generations. This road was built by my grandpa for moving cattle. It's private." "I've spoken with my lawyer," Patricia said, looking at her diamond-studded watch impatiently. "He says we could claim easement by prescription given the long-standing use of this road." "But there hasn't been any long-standing use," Jackson Tew protested. "No one used this road except my family until you started driving on it last month." Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, that would be for a court to decide, wouldn't it? I'm sure you can afford a good lawyer to match mine." She laughed like she'd made a joke. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm late for my Pilates class." As she drove away, Jackson watched the deep tire tracks her heavy vehicle left in his soft dirt road. After a good rain, those ruts would fill with water and make the road almost impossible to use with his old truck. not to mention the stress it caused his horses, who would run to the far end of the pasture whenever her car approached. That night, a rare summer storm hit the area. Rain poured down in sheets, thunder booming across the sky. Jackson sat on his covered porch, watching lightning flash over the expensive houses of Whispering Pines. Their bright security lights stayed on all night, even during the storm, making the rain look like falling sparks. The next morning, Jackson went to check on the road. Just as he feared, it was a muddy mess with deep puddles where Patricia's Range Rover had carved ruts into the ground. As he stood there, shaking his head, the familiar sound of an expensive engine approached. Patricia's Range Rover came around the bend, slowing only slightly when she saw the muddy mess. Then, with determination written across her face, she accelerated and drove right through the puddles, sending muddy water flying everywhere, including all over Jackson's jeans and work shirt. She didn't even stop to apologize. That was the moment something changed in Jackson. He'd always been a patient man who believed problems could be solved by talking things out. But some people didn't want to talk. Some people only understood actions. As he walked back to his house, covered in mud and feeling his anger rise, Jackson began to think about his time in the military. He'd been an engineer, trained to solve problems with the resources available. And right now, he had a very specific problem that needed solving. "If she wants to drive on my land so badly," he said to his old ranch dog who walked loyally by his side, "maybe we should give her a proper welcome." The dog wagged its tail, seeming to understand perfectly what its master was thinking. Jackson spent the next few days thinking about how to handle the Patricia problem. He wasn't the type to give up easily, especially when it came to his family's land. He decided to try one more time to solve things the proper way before taking matters into his own hands. The monthly HOA meeting for Whispering Pines was held in their fancy community center, a building with huge windows and modern furniture that probably cost more than Jackson's truck. He felt out of place walking in with his work boots and faded jeans, carrying a folder of papers and photos under his arm. People turned to stare as he entered. Some nodded politely, recognizing him as the ranch owner next door. Others whispered, behind their hands, probably wondering what he was doing there. Patricia sat at the head of a long table typing on her phone. She didn't even look up when Jackson approached. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat. "I'd like to speak during the open comments section." Patricia glanced up, her face showing surprise before quickly changing to irritation. "This meeting is for Whispering Pines residents only." An older gentleman with kind eyes spoke up from the table. "Actually, Patricia, the bylaws allow for community members to speak if their concerns involve the neighborhood. I'm sure we can spare 5 minutes." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine. We'll hear you after we discuss the new landscaping budget." Jackson waited patiently through discussions about flower beds and water features. Finally, Patricia pointed at him. "You have 3 minutes." Jackson stood up, suddenly aware of how rough his hands looked compared to everyone else's. "Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Jackson Davis. My ranch borders your development on the east side." He opened his folder and placed several photos on the table. "These show the damage being done to my private road by someone driving through my property daily." The pictures clearly showed deep tire tracks cutting across his land, muddy ruts filled with water, and his broken gate. "I've put up signs and barriers, but they keep getting removed. My horses are getting spooked, and I'm having trouble moving my equipment around because the road is so torn up." He placed another photo on the table. "This is from my security camera. As you can see, it shows Mrs. Wellington removing my chain barrier and driving across my property." The room went quiet. Some people leaned forward to look at the photos. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Jackson continued. "I'm just asking for basic respect for private property. This road isn't a public shortcut. It's part of my working ranch." Patricia stood up suddenly. "Are you accusing me of trespassing?" Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm not accusing. The photos show what's happening," Jackson said calmly. "I've asked politely several times for this to stop." Patricia looked around the room, noticing the uncomfortable expressions on her neighbors' faces. That road has obviously been there for decades. It's practically a public easement at this point. Ma'am, my grandfather built that road in the 1960s for moving cattle between pastures. It's never been public, Jackson explained. Your little farm is an eyesore, Patricia snapped, changing tactics. Do you have any idea how much your outdated operation brings down our property values? Those smelly animals in that shabby house? We're trying to build a prestigious community here. Jackson felt his face growing hot, but he kept his voice steady. My little farm was here long before your houses, and it's not an operation. It's my home. The older gentleman who had spoken earlier raised his hand. I think we need to respect property boundaries, Patricia. If it's his land. You don't understand real estate law, Harold. Patricia cut him off. Established usage patterns create legal rights. A woman with glasses sitting near the back spoke up. My husband is a realtor, and that's not exactly how it works. If the land is privately owned and properly marked. We're not having this discussion now, Patricia said firmly. She turned to Jackson. Your 3 minutes are up. If you have concerns, put them in writing and submit them properly. Jackson gathered his photos. I was hoping we could work this out neighbor to neighbor, but I see that's not possible. As he turned to leave, several homeowners approached him. I'm sorry about this, a man in a blue sweater said quietly. Some of us don't agree with how things are being handled. My kids love seeing your horses when we walk by, a woman added. We moved here from the city so they could experience a little country life. Jackson appreciated their support, but it didn't solve his problem. As he walked to his truck, he heard footsteps behind him. Mr. Davis? It was Harold, the older gentleman from the meeting. I wanted to apologize for how that went, Harold said. Patricia can be difficult. She's used to getting her way. Jackson sighed. I'm not trying to start a war. I just want her to stop driving across my land. Harold nodded. A bunch of us aren't happy with how she runs things, but she's got connections with the developer, so people are afraid to stand up to her. He looked back at the building. Just be careful. She doesn't take well to being challenged. A week later, Jackson found a letter in his mailbox. It was from a law firm representing the Whispering Pines HOA. The letter claimed he was harassing an HOA member and interfering with established access routes. It demanded he remove all barriers immediately or face legal action. Jackson took the letter to the local sheriff's office, hoping for some support. Sheriff Tom Wilkins had known Jackson for years. He read the letter slowly, then sighed. This is a civil matter, Jackson. Not much I can do officially. She's trespassing on my land every day, Jackson protested. And I believe you, the sheriff said. But her fancy lawyer will tie this up in court for months. You'd need your own lawyer to fight it. Jackson ran his hand through his graying hair. I can't afford to hire some expensive city lawyer. I know, Sheriff Wilkins looked sympathetic, and she probably knows that too. Driving home, Jackson felt the weight of defeat pressing down on him. He couldn't afford a legal battle, but he couldn't let Patricia keep damaging his property either. As he pulled up to his ranch house, he noticed fresh tire tracks cutting across his field. Not even using the dirt road this time, but driving right over the grass where his horses usually grazed. Jackson sat in his truck for a long moment, staring at the damaged land that had been in his family for generations. Enough is enough, he said to himself, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. If Patricia wanted to play hardball, he could play too. And he had skills she knew nothing about. His time as a military engineer hadn't just taught him how to build things, it had taught him how to set traps. That night, Jackson couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the threatening letter from Patricia's lawyer. His dad's old clock ticked loudly on the wall, reminding him that time was passing but nothing was getting solved. The kitchen was the heart of Jackson's home, simple but comfortable with wooden cabinets his grandfather had built and a view of the pasture through the window. Family photos hung on the walls, showing 3 generations of Davises standing proudly on the same porch where Jackson now spent his evenings. What would you do, Dad? He muttered. glancing at a photo of his father standing beside the first fence they'd built together when Jackson was just a boy. Jackson grabbed his laptop, an old clunky thing that took forever to start up, and began searching for ways to protect private property. Most suggestions involved more signs, better, fences or security cameras. He already had all that, and Patricia just ignored them. He was about to give up when he spotted an article about farmers dealing with trespassers. He clicked on it and began reading. Some farmers were using creative but harmless methods to discourage people from crossing their land. The ideas ranged from sprinkler systems triggered by motion sensors to loud noisemakers that scared away unwanted visitors. "That's it," Jackson said, suddenly sitting up straight. He wouldn't do anything to hurt Patricia or her fancy car, but he could sure make her think twice about using his land as her personal shortcut. The next morning, Jackson drove to the hardware store in town. Old Pete, who'd owned the place for 30 years, greeted him as he walked in. "Morning, Jackson. What project you working on today?" Jackson explained his problem, carefully leaving out any names or specific details. Pete scratched his chin. "Sounds to me like you need something that makes a statement without causing real trouble." Together, they walked through the store, picking up supplies. Pressure-sensitive plates normally used for automatic doors, air horns, sprinkler parts, and several gallons of bright orange dye used for marking underground pipes. "This dye is non-toxic and biodegradable," Pete assured him. "Won't hurt the ground, plants, or animals, but it sure stands out and it takes a good while to wash off." Jackson also bought several official-looking yellow signs. On the way home, he stopped at a print shop and had the signs customized with bold letters that read, "Warning, property protection devices installed. Proceed at your own risk." Back at the ranch, Jackson got to work. He'd always been good with his hands, and his military engineering training came flooding back as he laid out his plans on paper first. He sketched a simple system. Pressure plates buried just beneath the dirt road surface connected to two different mechanisms. Air horns mounted in nearby trees, and a sprinkler system that would spray the orange dye upward when activated. "Let's see how she likes announcing her trespassing to the whole neighborhood," he said to himself as he calibrated the pressure plates. He set them to trigger only under the weight of a vehicle. His horses and other animals wouldn't be heavy enough to set them off when standing on just one plate. He also made sure to position them only on the private road, away from any walking paths that hikers might use. It took 3 days of hard work. Jackson dug carefully, buried the pressure plates at strategic points along the road, and disguised them so they were invisible to the eye. He connected all the wiring and tested the system with his own truck, making adjustments until everything worked perfectly. The air horns were loud enough to be startling, but not so loud they would cause panic. The orange dye sprayed in a concentrated pattern that would mostly hit the underside and lower portions of a vehicle. Jackson was careful to set everything up so it wouldn't hit a driver directly. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone, just send a message. He installed his warning signs prominently at the entrance to his property and added a few security cameras to record whatever happened next. One camera he positioned to capture the entire road, another focused specifically on the area where his traps, or as he thought of them, his property protection devices, were installed. The final touch was a large sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing. Violators will be recorded and reported." On the fourth morning, Jackson sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, waiting. Would Patricia see the signs and turn around? Would she call his bluff and drive through anyway? He wasn't sure, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had some control over the situation. His neighbor Harold from the HOA had stopped by the previous evening and noticed Jackson working on something. "What are you up to?" Harold had asked, eyeing the signs and equipment in Jackson's truck. Jackson had simply smiled. "Just setting up some security for my property, nothing dangerous, nothing illegal." Harold had looked concerned. "Patricia's on a rampage since that meeting. She's been telling everyone you're threatening her." "I'm not threatening anyone," Jackson had replied calmly. "Just protecting what's mine in a way that follows the law." Now, as the morning sun climbed higher, Jackson checked his watch. Patricia usually drove through around 8:30 a.m. on her way to her yoga class or shopping trip, or whatever fancy people did with their weekday mornings when they didn't have to work for a living. At 8:27, a familiar engine sound caught his attention. The white Range Rover appeared at the entrance to his property, slowing slightly as Patricia presumably read the warning signs. Jackson held his breath. Would she turn around? The Range Rover paused for a moment. Then, with what seemed like deliberate defiance, it accelerated past the signs and onto his dirt road. Jackson picked up the tablet connected to his security cameras and watched. Patricia's face was visible through the windshield, her expression determined as she drove exactly where she always did. 3, 2, 1. Jackson counted down quietly. The Range Rover hit the first pressure plate. The air horn blasted so loud that birds flew from nearby trees. On the tablet screen, Jackson could see Patricia jump in surprise, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. But instead of stopping, she drove faster, seeming angry at being startled. That's when she hit the second plate. The orange dye sprayed, up from hidden nozzles along the road, hitting the white Range Rover in an explosion of bright color. Through the camera, Jackson could see Patricia's shocked expression as her pristine luxury vehicle was suddenly decorated with bright orange streaks and splatters. As she hit the third and fourth plates, more horns blared and more dye sprayed. By the time she reached the end of Jackson's road, the Range Rover looked like it had driven through an orange car wash. Jackson couldn't help but smile. He hadn't damaged her car or hurt anyone. He'd just made his point in a way she couldn't ignore, and in a way that would be very, very hard to explain to her fancy friends at the country club. Jackson watched on his tablet as Patricia slammed on her brakes at the end of his dirt road. For a moment, she just sat there in her now orange-splattered Range Rover, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. Then she looked right at the camera, almost like she knew it was there, and her face turned as red as a summer tomato. She threw her car door open and stepped out, her designer shoes landing in the dusty dirt. Jackson could see orange splatters on her cream-colored pants and fancy blouse. Her phone was already in her hand, and she was jabbing at it furiously with her finger. Jackson took a deep breath and set his coffee mug down. The show was about to begin, and he needed to be ready. He clicked a button on his tablet to save all the camera footage, then stood up from his porch chair just as Patricia's Range Rover came roaring up his driveway. She screeched to a halt, sending gravel flying, and stormed toward his porch. "You!" she shouted, pointing a manicured finger at him. "You did this! Look what you've done to my car!" Jackson leaned against his porch railing, trying to look calmer than he felt. "Good morning, Mrs. Wellington. Seems like you had a bit of trouble on my private road, the one with all the no trespassing signs. Those things you put in the road, they're illegal," she sputtered. "You can't just set traps for people. I'm calling the sheriff right now." "Already did," Jackson said mildly. "Asked him to come by this morning. Should be here any minute." As if on cue, the sound of another car approaching made them both turn. Sheriff Tom Wilkins pulled up in his patrol car, stepping out with a concerned look on his face. He took one glance at Patricia's orange-splattered Range Rover and had to quickly cover his mouth with his hand. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice strained like he was trying not to laugh. This man set landmines on his property," Patricia shrieked, waving her arms wildly. "He's trying to kill me. I want him arrested immediately." The sheriff raised his eyebrows. "Landmines? That's a serious accusation, ma'am." "See for yourself." Patricia pointed at her orange-covered car. "Look what his explosives did to my vehicle. It's ruined. That's a $90,000 car." Sheriff Wilkins walked around the Range Rover examining the orange splatters. He dipped his finger in one of the wet spots and rubbed it between his fingers. "This isn't explosive damage, ma'am. This appears to be marking dye, the kind they use for underground pipes. I don't care what it is. He booby-trapped his road to attack me." By now, the commotion had attracted attention. A few cars had pulled over on the main road, and people were watching. Jackson recognized some of them as Whispering Pines residents, including Harold and a few others from the HOA meeting. "Tom, why don't you come see exactly what I set up?" Jackson suggested to the sheriff. "I'll show you everything." The three of them walked down to the dirt road with Patricia stomping behind them, still fuming. Jackson pointed out his warning signs, then showed the sheriff one of the pressure plates by digging away a little dirt, covering it. It's a simple pressure plate connected to two things, an air horn and a sprinkler system filled with biodegradable marking dye, the kind that washes off with soap and water after a few days. Not harmful to people, animals, or even cars. I got it all at Pete's Hardware. And these pressure plates, they're just on your private road? Not on any public property? The sheriff asked. Yes, sir. Only on my private road that is clearly posted no trespassing signs. And I even added extra warning signs about the property protection devices. Sheriff Wilkins nodded slowly. And you mentioned you have camera footage? Yes, sir. Shows Mrs. Wellington driving past all the warning signs and onto my private road. Also shows her removing my chain barriers multiple times over the past few weeks. Patricia's face was getting redder by the minute. This is absurd. You can't just set traps for people. They're not traps, ma'am, the sheriff said. They're what Mr. Davis accurately called property protection devices. They don't cause any damage or injury, they just make noise and spray some washable dye. He turned to Jackson. Though I have to say that's a creative solution to your trespassing problem. This is outrageous, Patricia sputtered. I'll sue you both. I'll have your job, Tom. And you, she pointed at Jackson. I'll make sure you lose this entire ranch once my lawyers are done with you. A small crowd had gathered by now. Among them, Jackson spotted several Whispering Pines residents walking down from the main road to see what was happening. Is everything okay? Called Harold, approaching with concern. We heard the noise all the way from my backyard. Sheriff Wilkins explained the situation briefly. Harold and a few other neighbors exchanged glances. Patricia, said a woman in jogging clothes that Jackson recognized from the HOA meeting. You've been driving across his private property, even after he asked you not to? It's a shortcut, Patricia snapped. Everyone uses shortcuts. Actually, no one else has been driving across his land, said another neighbor, a man in a business suit who looked like he was on his way to work. We all use the main road like we're supposed to. The HOA specifically discussed respecting the boundaries with neighboring properties, added Harold, at the very meeting where Mr. Davis here brought up his concerns. Patricia looked around, suddenly realizing she had no supporters in the growing crowd. Even some of her closest allies from the HOA were looking at her with disapproval. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice slightly less confident. He vandalized my car. No, ma'am, said the sheriff firmly. You trespassed on clearly marked private property. Ignoring multiple warnings, and the property owner had installed a non-harmful deterrent system on his own land. That's not vandalism. Then what exactly is it? Patricia demanded. A young woman in the crowd suddenly giggled. I'd call it instant karma. Several people laughed, and someone started taking pictures with their phone. Patricia's face flushed with embarrassment as she noticed people pointing at her orange-splattered outfit and car. This isn't over, she hissed at Jackson, then turned and stalked back to her Range Rover. As she drove away, orange drips fell from her car onto the pavement, leaving a trail that everyone could follow. Sheriff Wilkins turned to Jackson with a barely hidden smile. Well, that's one way to handle the trespasser. Just be careful. She seems like the type to hold a grudge. Jackson nodded. I know, but at least now everyone sees what's really going on. As the crowd began to disperse, several Whispering Pines residents came up to shake Jackson's hand. That was brilliant, Harold said with admiration. Non-violent, non-damaging, but definitely effective. Sorry about all this, said the jogging woman. Not all of us at Whispering Pines are like her. For the first time in weeks, Jackson felt like he might actually win this battle. He hadn't lost his temper or done anything illegal. He'd just found a creative way to stand his ground. And sometimes, that was all you needed to do to get people to listen. Word spread quickly through Whispering Pines about Patricia's orange Range Rover. By that afternoon, Jackson's phone was buzzing with text messages from neighbors he'd never even spoken to before, most of them supportive. Did you really turn her car orange? Texted Lucy, who lived at the edge of the development closest to his property. The whole neighborhood is talking about it, Harold called to warn him that Patricia was on the warpath. She's called an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night. Says it's about security concerns with neighboring properties, but everyone knows what she really means. Jackson sighed as he fed his horses that evening. Even though he felt he'd done the right thing, he didn't enjoy being at the center of neighborhood drama. He'd always kept to himself, preferring the company of his animals to most people. The next morning brought an unexpected surprise. Someone had uploaded a video to social media showing Patricia's orange-splattered Range Rover driving through town, with her fuming behind the wheel. The person filming could be heard laughing and saying, "That's what happens when you trespass on Old Man Davis's ranch." By noon, the video had thousands of views and shares. People were adding comments like, "Ranch justice," and "Don't mess with country folks." Some locals who knew the backstory added details about how Patricia had been trespassing for weeks despite repeated warnings. Jackson only found out about the video when his niece called from 2 states away. "Uncle Jack, you're famous," she exclaimed. "Did you really spray some rich lady's car orange?" It wasn't exactly like that, he tried to explain, but she was too excited to listen. "My friends think you're awesome, standing up to entitled rich people." That evening, Jackson noticed more cars than usual driving slowly past his property. People were pointing and taking pictures of his warning signs. A few waved when they saw him on the porch. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered to his old dog, who just wagged his tail in response. At the emergency HOA meeting, Patricia stood before the gathered homeowners, wearing a perfectly pressed suit and a grim expression. Her Range Rover, she explained, was at a specialty detailer trying to remove the toxic chemicals that had been maliciously sprayed on it. "This is a serious safety concern," she announced to the room. "What if it had been one of your children walking across that property? They could have been injured or worse." Harold raised his hand. "But why would our children be walking across Mr. Davis's private property in the first place? There are clearly posted no trespassing signs. And from what I understand," added a woman named Beth who worked as a nurse, "the dye used is completely non-toxic. It's the same stuff they use to mark utilities." Patricia's face tightened. "That's not the point. The point is that he set traps. Property protection devices," corrected another homeowner. "That's what Sheriff Wilkins called them in his report. I saw a copy at the station today when I was filing some paperwork." "Whatever you want to call them," Patricia snapped. "They damaged my property and could have caused an accident." "Did you have permission to drive across his land?" asked a new resident, a young guy who had just moved in last month. Patricia glared at him. "I've been using that road for about 3 weeks, interrupted Harold. "According to Mr. Davis, who owns the land that's been in his family for generations." The mood in the room had clearly shifted. Where Patricia had once ruled the HOA meetings with an iron fist, now people were openly questioning her. "I move that we take a vote," said Beth suddenly. "I don't think Patricia should continue as HOA president if she's going to represent us this way." Patricia's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious. Over one little disagreement with that farmer?" "It's not just this incident," Harold said quietly. "It's how you've been running things. The excessive fines, the constant complaints about minor issues, using your position to get special treatment." One by one, other residents began speaking up with their own grievances against Patricia. The new landscaping rules that only wealthy homeowners could afford to follow. The way she'd blocked a family's application to build a wheelchair ramp for their grandmother. The time she'd had someone's car towed because it was parked 3 inches over their driveway line. In the end, the vote wasn't even close. Patricia was removed as HOA president with Harold elected as the interim replacement until proper elections could be held. The next day, Jackson was fixing his fence when a group of Whispering Pines residents approached. Harold was in front, along with Beth and several others he recognized from the HOA meeting. "We wanted to apologize," Harold said, extending his hand. "What happened with Patricia wasn't right, and we should have stepped in sooner." "No need to apologize," Jackson said, shaking Harold's hand. "You weren't the ones driving across my land." "Actually, we have a proposal," Beth said. The HOA would like to fund the construction of a proper fence along the property line between your ranch and our development, something that would clearly mark the boundary and prevent any, confusion in the future. Jackson raised his eyebrows. That's mighty generous. Fencing isn't cheap. Consider it a peace offering, Harold said with a smile. And maybe, once the fence is up, you might consider letting us organize a community day at your ranch. Many of our kids have never seen horses up close or learned where their food comes from. For the first time in years, Jackson felt a genuine connection to his neighbors. Maybe there was a way for the old and new to exist side by side after all. A week later, work began on the new fence, a sturdy, attractive boundary that respected both properties. Jackson kept his property protection devices installed, though he never needed to activate them again. As a joke, he mounted one of the orange-splattered warning signs on his mailbox post, and it became something of a local landmark. As for Patricia, she put her house on the market the following month and moved to another luxury development across town. Rumor had it that she hadn't been able to completely remove the orange dye from her Range Rover and had been forced to sell it at a significant loss. The first community day at Davis Ranch was held that fall. Children from Whispering Pines petted horses, learned how to milk cows, and picked apples from Jackson's small orchard. Their parents chatted with Jackson about country living and asked his advice about growing their own vegetables in their backyards. Standing on his porch that evening after everyone had gone home, Jackson looked out at his land with a sense of peace. The new fence gleamed in the sunset light, a symbol not of division but of mutual respect. "You know what, Dad?" he said quietly to the memory of his father. "Sometimes the best way to protect what matters isn't with anger or force. Sometimes it's just making sure everyone knows where the boundaries are and having a little fun with those who don't respect them." His old dog woofed softly in agreement, and together they watched the stars begin to appear over the ranch that would remain in the Davis family for generations to come.